The Cursed Manor's True Crime Archive. Unsealed and Unsettling Cases. Imagine a house where every creak tells a story, and every shadow hides a secret. Not fiction, but a real manor, filled with archives so disturbing, they were sealed away for decades. We're about to unearth the chilling truths of forgotten crimes, cases where reality bends and the inexplicable reigns. Are you ready to see what lies beneath the dust of the Cursed Manor's true crime past? The iron gates of Blackwood Manor groaned as they swung open for the first time in 43 years. I stood at the threshold with my documentary crew, feeling the weight of history pressing against my chest like a physical force. The manor loomed before us, its Victorian silhouette carved against a bruised October sky. This wasn't just another abandoned estate. This was a vault, a repository of the unspeakable. Blackwood Manor had served as the private estate of Judge Cornelius Thorne from 1889 until his mysterious disappearance in 1947. But what made this place truly extraordinary, truly cursed, was what we discovered in the sealed eastern wing. An archive. Not just any archive, but a collection of case files, personal journals, and evidence from crimes so disturbing, so inexplicable, that they were deliberately buried by authorities who feared what they represented. The local historical society had finally granted us access after years of legal battles. As I pushed open the heavy oak doors, the smell hit me first. Not decay, but something else. Old paper certainly, but beneath that, something metallic. Something that reminded me of blood left too long in the sun. The Holloway Children. 1923. The first case we extracted from the archive sat in a leather-bound folder, its pages yellowed but remarkably preserved. The Holloway File. In the summer of 1923, 3 children from the nearby village of Ashford disappeared within a span of 2 weeks. Thomas Holloway, age 8. His sister Margaret, age 6. And their cousin David Brennan, age 7. The investigation was led by Judge Thorne himself, who at that time also served as a magistrate. According to the police reports, all 3 children vanished from their beds at night. No signs of forced entry. No sounds reported by family members sleeping in adjacent rooms. Just empty beds with the sheets pulled back, as if the children had simply stood up and walked away. But it was the photographs in the file that made my blood run cold. Each family had reported finding something before their child disappeared. A small cairn of stones stacked impossibly high on their doorstep. In the black and white photographs, these towers of stones reached nearly 4 feet tall, balanced in configurations that seemed to defy gravity. Smooth river stones stacked in spiraling patterns, with no mortar, no support, nothing but impossible equilibrium. The handwritten notes in the margins of Judge Thorne's journal entry revealed something even more disturbing. The stones are warm to the touch, even in the morning cold. Mrs. Holloway swears she heard singing at 3:47 a.m. A child's voice, but not her son's. She found the cairn at dawn. The search parties scoured the countryside for weeks. And then, on the 33rd day, all 3 children were found. They were standing in a perfect triangle in the middle of Blackwood Forest, exactly 2 miles from the manor. Alive but changed. Their clothes were immaculate, as if freshly laundered. Their hair was neatly combed. But their eyes. The medical examiner's report described them as glassy, distant, looking at something no one else could see. None of the children spoke for 3 months. When they finally did, each told the same story word for word, as if reciting from a script they'd memorized together. They said they'd been taken to a house beneath the ground. A house with rooms that stretched on forever, where the walls breathed and the floors were made of glass that looked down into an endless darkness. They said a woman in a white dress had fed them sweets and sung them lullabies in a language that felt old, older than words themselves. The woman had told them they could stay forever, that they were special, that they had been chosen. But on the 33rd night, she'd brought them back to the forest and told them they were seeds now. Seeds that had been planted in better soil. Judge Thorne's final note on the case was written in a shaking hand. I have ordered this file sealed. The children are alive, but I fear what grows within them. God help us if they bloom. All 3 children died before their 20th birthday. Thomas Holloway drowned in his bathtub in 1935. Margaret stepped in front of a train in 1937. David Brennan hanged himself from a tree in Blackwood Forest in 1939, the same tree where he'd been found as a child. Each left behind a suicide note containing only 3 words, written over and over until the page was black with ink. "She's still singing." The Midnight Caller, 1931. The second file we uncovered was thinner, but somehow heavier. It felt wrong in my hands, as if the paper itself retained the memory of the horror it documented. Between March and August of 1931, 17 households in the villages surrounding Blackwood Manor reported receiving telephone calls at precisely midnight. The same pattern every time. The phone would ring, the family member would answer, and a voice would speak. But it wasn't what the voice said that terrified people. It was what it knew. The first call came to the Whitmore family. Edward Whitmore answered the phone at 12 a.m. to hear a woman's voice. Calm, almost musical. Tell him about a secret he'd kept for 18 years. In 1913, Edward had struck a vagrant with his car on a lonely country road. The man had died, and Edward had buried him in the woods rather than face scandal. No one knew about this. Not his wife, not the police, not even his priest. The voice on the phone described the location of the body with perfect accuracy. It described the vagrant's face, the sound his skull had made against the wheel well. Then it laughed, a sound like breaking glass, and the line went dead. Edward Whitmore shot himself 2 days later. The calls continued, each one revealing a buried secret, a hidden crime, a private shame. Judge Thorne documented each case meticulously, interviewing the survivors, trying to find a pattern. What he discovered was more disturbing than any individual call. Every secret the Midnight Caller revealed was connected to Blackwood Manor. Not directly perhaps, but through strange threads of coincidence that felt too deliberate to be random. Edward Whitmore had buried the vagrant in woods that were once part of the manor's estate. A woman who received a call about her infant's suspicious death had worked as a maid in the manor in 1922. A man confronted with evidence of embezzlement had stolen money to pay debts to Judge Thorne's own father. It was as if the manor itself was reaching out through the telephone lines, calling in debts, exposing sins, demanding payment for crimes committed in its shadow. The final call was documented in Judge Thorne's personal journal, and reading it made my hands shake. At midnight on August 15, 1931, Judge Thorne's own telephone rang. He answered, knowing what he would hear. The voice, that same calm, musical voice, spoke to him about a case from his early career. A young woman named Elizabeth Carr who had been convicted of murdering her husband in 1895. Elizabeth had maintained her innocence, claiming her husband had simply disappeared, that she'd never harmed him. But Judge Thorne had found her guilty based on circumstantial evidence and sentenced her to hang. She died proclaiming her innocence, cursing the judge and his house with her last breath. The voice on the telephone told Judge Thorne where he could find Harold Carr's real body. Not buried by his wife, but hidden in the walls of Blackwood Manor itself, bricked up in the wine cellar during renovations in 1894, a year before Elizabeth had been accused. The voice told Judge Thorne that Harold Carr had been murdered by the construction foreman, a man who'd been having an affair with Harold's sister. The voice told him that this man had died peacefully in 1920, never caught, never punished. And it told him that Elizabeth Carr's ghost had watched from the walls of the manor as Judge Thorne condemned an innocent woman to death. Then the voice asked a question. How many innocent souls live in your walls, Judge Thorne? How many secrets does your house keep? Judge Thorne ordered the wine cellar excavated the next day. They found skeletal remains exactly where the voice had described. Dental records confirmed them as Harold Carr. The midnight calls stopped after that night. But Judge Thorne filled 17 pages of his journal with the names of cases he now questioned, sentences he feared might have been wrong. The last entry in that section reads, "The house knows. God help me, the house has always known." The Disappearing Room, 1938. This was the file that made 2 of my crew members quit. They walked out of the manor and refused to return, and I can't say I blame them. In the spring of 1938, Blackwood Manor was briefly used as a boarding house for artists and writers, an attempt by Judge Thorne's nephew to generate income from the estate. 7 people lived in the manor during that time. Only 5 survived. According to witness statements, a young painter named Catherine Wells discovered a room on the 3rd floor that didn't appear on any of the house's architectural plans. She found it by accident when she took a wrong turn after midnight, slightly drunk on wine from dinner. The door was painted the same color as the walls, a dusky rose, making it nearly invisible. But Catherine's candle caught the brass doorknob, and curiosity drew her inside. She described a circular room with no windows and walls lined entirely with mirrors. In the center stood a single chair. And sitting in the chair was a woman in Victorian dress, her back to the door, her dark hair piled high on her head. Catherine called out a greeting. The woman didn't respond. Catherine stepped into the room, and the door swung shut behind her. For the next 17 hours, the other residents searched the manor for Catherine. They found nothing. No hidden room, no door, no trace of where she'd gone. It was only when they were preparing to call the police that Catherine came stumbling down the main staircase, screaming. Her hair had gone completely white. Her fingernails were torn and bloody. And she wouldn't stop talking about the mirrors. A psychiatrist was called, and his notes are preserved in the file. Catherine told him that the moment the door closed, the woman in the chair had vanished. When Catherine turned to leave, she'd found herself facing not a door, but another mirror. Every surface was a mirror. Infinite reflections stretching away into darkness. And in those reflections, she wasn't alone. There were hundreds of them, the psychiatrist wrote, documenting her statement. Hundreds of people trapped in the mirrors. Men, women, children. All wearing clothes from different eras. All staring at her. All reaching out. Catherine said she'd screamed for help until her voice gave out. She'd thrown herself against the mirrors, bloodying her hands trying to break through. But the mirrors never cracked. They only reflected her panic back at her, along with those watching faces, those reaching hands. Time moved strangely in the room. What felt like days might have been hours. What felt like hours might have been minutes. She said she grew so thirsty she licked moisture from the mirrors. She said she watched herself age in the reflections, watched her face grow gaunt, her eyes sink into her skull. And she said that eventually, the figures in the mirrors began to speak. They told her their names. Told her when they died. Told her they were part of the house now, feeding it with their fear, their despair, their slowly fading consciousness. They told her she would join them soon, would become another face in another mirror in another impossible room. But then, inexplicably, the door appeared. Just manifested in the wall where there had been only mirror before. Catherine lunged through it and ran. She was committed to an asylum 2 weeks later. She died there in 1941, having never painted again. Her last words, according to the nurse on duty, were, "My face is still in there. My face is still in the mirror. Please, someone break the mirror." But here's what made my crew quit. After reading Catherine's file, we found a notation in Judge Thorne's handwriting. Investigated room. Found door precisely where Miss Wells described. Room is empty save for chair and mirrors. Mirrors show only normal reflections. However, I counted reflections for 5 minutes. In that time I was reflected 93 times. I only entered the room once. Am I to believe I'm trapped in 82 mirrors somewhere in my own house? That entry was dated April 15, 1938. On April 22, a second notation. Returned to room. Counted again. 147 reflections. I have not entered the room since last week. May 3. The room is growing. 203 reflections. Some are not quite right. Some are older than I am. Some are younger. One is screaming silently in its mirror. It has my face. May 11th. Sealed the room. Built a wall over the door. Tried to forget. But I can feel it. The room is still there behind the plaster. And I think it's looking for a way out. The file contains architectural drawings showing where the room should be on the 3rd floor. Check. There's a wall there. Solid brick. Built in 1938 according to the plaster composition. But when we knocked on it, it sounded hollow. And in the silence after, we heard it. A sound like hands pressing against glass. Dozens of hands. Hundreds of hands. We didn't knock again. The Vanishing, 1947. The final file in the archive was Judge Thorne's own. The last entry he made before he disappeared. By 1947, Judge Thorne was 86 years old and living alone in Blackwood Manor. His family had abandoned the estate years before. Too many nightmares, they said. Too many rooms that felt wrong. Too many nights hearing footsteps in empty hallways. But Thorne refused to leave. In his final journals, he wrote about a responsibility. A duty to remain. Someone must watch, he wrote. Someone must bear witness to what the house collects. His last entry is dated October 31st, 1947. It reads, "They've been gathering for weeks now. I see them in the corners of my vision, the children from 1923, grown now into something not quite human. The faces from Catherine's mirrors, pushing against the inside of windows. The voice from the telephone, manifested as a woman in white who stands in my garden at midnight, counting the stones in her cairn. The house has been collecting for so long. Collecting secrets, collecting sins, collecting souls. I understand now that it's not cursed. It's alive. It's been alive since the foundation was laid, since the first stone was mortared to the second. Something was built into the bones of this place. Something hungry. And tonight, All Hallows' Eve, it means to feed. I can hear them coming up the stairs. All of them. Every case in my archive, every victim, every perpetrator, every innocent soul caught in the house's collection. They're coming to show me what I've been guarding all these years. They're coming to show me what I've become. The mirror room is opening. I can feel the walls thinning. Soon, there won't be a separation between the house and what it holds. Soon, everything it's collected will be free. Or perhaps I have it backwards. Perhaps we're about to be collected. Perhaps we always were. If you're reading this, you've opened the archive. You've unsealed what was meant to stay hidden. Sorry. I sealed these files to protect the world from knowing what Blackwood Manor truly is. But now you know. And now it knows you. Count your reflections. Listen for the midnight calls. Stack your stones and see what comes. Welcome to the collection. Welcome home. Judge Cornelius Thorne was never seen again after October 31st, 1947. His body was never found. A search of the manor revealed nothing unusual, just an old man's abandoned home, filled with dust and fading memories. The archive was sealed by court order. The manor was closed. Till now. As we prepared to leave Blackwood Manor that first day, one of my crew members called out from the third floor. She'd found something in the sealed room, the mirror room. The wall Judge Thorne had built was cracking, she said. She could see light coming through. We rushed up the stairs. Sure enough, a fissure had appeared in the brick wall, running from floor to ceiling. And through that crack we could see it, the circular room. Chair. The mirrors. And in every mirror, a reflection of Judge Cornelius Thorne. Not one reflection. Thousands. Each one slightly different. Each one trapped in its own separate reality, staring out at us with eyes that had been watching for 76 years. As we stood there, frozen in horror, all of the reflections moved as one. They raised their hands and pressed them against the inside of the mirrors. And they began to push. We ran. God help us, we ran from that house and didn't look back. But I can still hear it sometimes in the quiet moments before sleep. The sound of glass straining under impossible pressure. The sound of a collection that's grown too large for its container. The sound of a house that's finally ready to open its doors and share what it's gathered. The archive is unsealed now. The cases are exposed. The stories are told. And every night at midnight my phone rings. I don't answer. But I know what the voice would say. I know what secret it would reveal. Because the most disturbing thing in Judge Thorne's archive wasn't any of the cases we found. It was the last file folder, empty except for a single index card. On that card in Thorne's shaking handwriting was a name, a date, and an address. Name. Today's date. My address. And beneath it, one line. The newest exhibit in Blackwood Manor's eternal collection. Expected arrival, upon reading. So I ask you now, as you sit in your own home, in your own safe space, listening to this story. How many reflections did you see the last time you looked in a mirror? Count them carefully. Count them now. Because the Cursed Manor's collection is still growing. And the house always remembers who opens its doors. Music swells, then fades to silence. In the silence, a phone rings once, then stops.